Morning. You sure this is your table? It's kind of a pricey spot for, well, you know.
Excuse me?
Just making sure you belong here, ma'am. Folks around here like things orderly.
I see. Hold on. This says I belong anywhere I need to be.
FBI?
Off duty and trying to enjoy my coffee.
Special Agent Kendra Elise Merriweather was a creature of routine long before routine became a survival mechanism. As one of the Bureau's most consistent performers in its Civil Rights Division feeder programs, discipline shaped her identity. Yet outside her work, her mornings were soft, deliberate, even human in a way law enforcement seldom allowed its people to be. She lived in a brick apartment complex off Connecticut Avenue, Washington, D.C., a carefully chosen midpoint between silence and access. She woke every day at 5:10 a.m., not by alarm, but internal cadence. Her mornings included meditation, hygiene, uniform care, and exactly one indulgence: coffee from the restaurant Sage and Timber, a neighborhood staple operating at the edge of industrial chic without feeling cold. Its staff knew her name, not her rank. On mornings when weather whispered invitation, she sat on the patio. When air turned brittle or a contemplative solitude felt preferable, she sat inside near the window where sun created a soft perimeter around the ordinary. Kendra stood 6 feet tall without apology, an athletic posture sculpted by years of tactical training and an earlier life in NCAA track. Her skin was a deep espresso brown that reflected light rather than absorbed it. Her hair was worn in neat, protected styles that varied but were always professional, deliberate, and non-distracting. She carried herself in quiet authority. People assumed things about her before she ever introduced herself. Most of those assumptions were wrong. Sage and Timber occupied an odd jurisdictional seam. Technically under D.C. metropolitan oversight, its surrounding blocks frequently saw patrols from multiple agencies, including local police units attached to federal cooperative task forces. This overlapping presence meant officers eating breakfast beside senators, prosecutors, and special agents was not uncommon. But recognition was selective, and respect was sharper when gender or race narrowed expectations. For Kendra, the restaurant was a brief detachment from fighting America's long story of constitutional contradiction. She did not want her coffee to symbolize anything. She only wanted the warmth, the taste, the ritual of stillness before the storm of case files, interrogations, undercover work, domestic extremism reports, biased policing investigations, and the particular irony of representing a federal institution once complicit in the injustices she now dismantled from within. On February 14, 2024, at 6:47 a.m., the morning took a turn that would later feel pre-written in the ledger of American policing: predictable, ugly, and unnecessary. It began with unremarkable logistics. Kendra had ordered her usual cold brew with oat milk, unsweetened, accompanied by a spinach breakfast wrap. She paid and left a modest tip. Then she moved to her seat on the patio. The air was cool but generous. A few patrons scrolled phones. A couple of commuters sipped lattes and half-read newspapers. No raised voices, no disturbance, no risk factors, no trouble. At 6:53 a.m., Patrol Officer Darren Holt, MPD Unit 5B-1613, entered the establishment and was informed without detail that someone on the patio was causing issues. This detail was later proven false, because trouble was not happening at all. But rumor had weight when paired with uniform and gun. Officer Holt was 39, white, Midwest-raised, recruited into law enforcement through legacy aspiration rather than community trust. His career at MPD had been checkered with excessive complaints of aggression, though none had forced severe consequences before this day. His record showed a pattern. Citizens complained, supervisors mediated, reports disappeared into filing cabinets with no political urgency attached. He approached the patio and immediately narrowed focus on Kendra. "Ma'am, you need to leave. You're causing trouble." The statement landed without specificity because it was not intended to describe, it was intended to command. Kendra looked up calmly, wrap still in hand. She chewed. She swallowed. She did not rise in agitation. Her pulse stayed quiet. Because Holt was shouting at someone who had spent her entire adult life trained to stay composed when armed men raised their voices. She pulled her bureau credential sleeve from her bag and flipped it open with a small practiced motion. Special Agent Kendra Merriweather, FBI. Holt's demeanor did not soften. It sharpened. I don't care what badge you gotta go. This was not a jurisdictional correction. It was a psychological collision. An officer unused to being contradicted by a black woman, even one who outranked him by every institutional metric his ego should have respected. Kendra did not fight him physically. She did not shout back. She did not escalate. She only insisted on not being removed from a coffee seat based on a lie. What trouble am I causing, officer? You arguing with me is the trouble. This answer revealed the entire mechanism. Accusation first, justification optional. The exchange became a disturbance only when Holt created one. Patrons watched. Some pulled phones, others froze, aware that objectivity rarely helped in police encounters, but documentation sometimes did. Holt did not ask questions. He grabbed her by the forearm. Last chance. She stood, not because she wanted to, but because movement had become non-optional. The removal was clean but coercive. No blood, no brutality that fit televised stereotype. Just a forced exit built from the quieter edge of unlawful policing, the kind that does not look violent but is violent structurally. She gathered her coffee and wrap and walked with his grip, steering her toward the street. He let go once she crossed the threshold from restaurant to sidewalk, the unspoken line of no witnesses worth arguing with past this point. For investigators later reconstructing the incident, one recurrent detail became analytical anchor. Kendra did not seem upset. This was misinterpreted by some as indifference, emotional detachment, or even compliance instinct. It was none of those. Kendra had interviewed cop violence victims, sued police departments with prosecutorial teams, taken testimonies from mothers who buried sons after traffic stops, infiltrated extremist networks built from white nationalist doctrine, interrogated domestic terrorists who killed cops' own colleagues, and read federal reports describing racial bias in policing so statistically obvious it read like census fact rather than scandal. Calm was not submission, calm was armor. The trouble call Holt responded to came not from staff, dispatch, or complaint logs. It came from a restaurant patron named Thomas Hale, a retired Capitol Police officer seated briefly inside before Kendra moved to the patio. Hale had flagged her presence to staff using coded vagueness, the only articulated reason later extracted from testimony. She looked like she might be waiting for someone important and could be trespassing. This too was false. He assumed danger not from behavior, but posture, blackness, and suspicion shaped by institutional habit. Staff at Sage and Timber did not corroborate wrongdoing, but a uniform request carries default escalation momentum. They attempted to satisfy Hale with verbal mediation. Mediation became enforcement only when Holt arrived looking for someone to remove, not someone to assess. Surveillance footage analysis confirmed Kendra was silent before Holt approached. She did not interact with other patrons aggressively. She did not match any person flagged for property disruption. No events could qualify as public disturbance until she was forcibly escorted out by a police officer. This created a fatal logical inversion in Holt's justification. He removed her before trouble, then used the removal to justify its own correctness. The FBI does not intervene in local police actions lightly. Its agents are required to observe jurisdictional restraint unless direct federal violations occur. But when a sworn MPD officer unlawfully detains a federal agent based on fabricated accusation, operational neutrality ends. The Bureau launched a routine incident integrity review, RIIR file, categorized not under assault but civil incident, unlawful detainment of federal personnel, severity Tier 3. The review escalated rapidly into matching elements of constitutional violation, public witness testimony, racial profiling, ego-driven escalation, and unlawful physical steering without just cause. At 7:09 a.m., Kendra returned to her car. At 7:14 a.m., she drove to Hoover Building security gate. At 7:27 a.m., she entered her floor and made coffee again, this time from the bureau break room machine. At 7:44 a.m., she was already reading case files. But by 8:10 a.m., the calm armor cracked not into emotion, but strategy. She filed her complaint at 9:47 a.m. under her own name, not through a proxy, supervisor, or protected channel, personally, because fighting injustice was her job. And jobs are not paused because someone abuses authority in what should have been a coffee line. Once the RIIR file intersected Holt's personnel history, the pattern exploded into narrative clarity, excessive aggression in citizen communication, emotional escalation when contradicted, psychological need to enforce dominance over professional women, disproportionately women of color, prior complaints never leading to termination, no training corrections applied despite repeated documentation, supervisory culture prioritizing officer retention over citizen trust. Holt did not climb MPD ranks. He ran beside them without discipline correction because a badge insulated him from consequence until this moment. The hearing collected evidence from surveillance footage analysis, 11 witness affidavits, restaurant staff sub-testimony, fabrication origin tracing, personnel history audit, jurisdictional law reviews, constitutional detainment laws, racial profiling precedent comparisons, psychological escalation pattern profiling. For the prosecution, narrative clarity became central. Holt did not commit television brutality. He committed everyday injustice cloaked in procedural obedience. The hearing was less about coffee and more about power. The hearing return decision, immediate termination from MPD, effective March 3, 2024, financial damages totaling $1 million awarded to Agent Merriweather, payment to be issued by the Metropolitan Police Department as institutional liability, not personal officer debt. No parole, probation, or criminal sentencing were applied because the case targeted detainment violation, not criminal battery. Holt was permanently barred from applying for federal cooperative policing task forces. An internal doctrine memo was issued requiring reform in MPD complaint mediation procedures. This was the first time Holt was forced to pay for something he had done without weapons or televised violence, but with a legal logic that finally found ceiling. You cannot detain someone because ignoring them bruises your ego. Some citizens celebrated, others questioned damages severity without reading violation specifics, but public optics were irrelevant. The punishment was precedent, not spectacle. Kendra accepted the money without celebration because injustice is not solved by settlement. Settlements are receipts, not reform. She worked harder, took more cases, pushed bias reviews further, logged more field hours, created external citizen trust workshops inside bureau training channels, advised on local police-federal cooperation structural bias, led raids, interviews, constitutional law strategy calls, and reform curriculum additions. Coffee was still her ritual, but the ritual changed meaning socially, not by her choice, but consequence of nation's wound. Patrons still saw a calm woman sipping cold brew. Few now dared assume she did not belong. After Holt's firing, bureau colleagues noted Kendra carrying a small notebook into meetings simply labeled imperative. Inside were 11 principles she later shared internally, archived unofficially by colleagues because truth from the field often outlives truth from policy binders. Her code included, law enforcement must protect the Constitution more than its own reputation. Authority that cannot be questioned is already unlawful. Calm is not compliance. Badges are not rank. Justice is rank. Profiling begins before violence. Violence does not need blood to destroy. Termination is not enough. Reform must replace. The vulnerable deserve investigative urgency equal to federal assets. Accountability without reform is recycling harm. Justice work demands endurance, not sentiment. Injustice fights hardest when no cameras roll. MPD was forced to rewrite its mediation protocol. The department publicly stated Holt's behavior violated detainment laws, but internal staff privately acknowledged what the hearing exposed. Complaints only vanish when no one important files them. Kendra became important not by intention but structural intersection: federal rank, public witnesses, clear evidence, constitutional violation, racial bias intersection, ego escalation documentation, professional gender profiling psychology. After the case, FBI civil rights files in D.C. region increased by 27%, not because policing worsened, but because citizens felt believed long enough to try again. Kendra personally championed 19 of those cases in 2024 to 2025, each involving systemic profiling, unlawful detainment, or constitutional escalation abuse by local law enforcement. Her arrest numbers were low, her reform impacts were high. Kendra still gets coffee every morning, patio or window seat depending on weather, not for symbolism, for remembering she is human. But if an officer ever tries ego enforcement again, federal investigators know without speculation she will file the complaint herself. This story was archived internally across federal civil rights investigative teams under educational reference category bias enforcement versus constitutional authority. It is studied now not as a sensational brutality case, but a quieter one. A black woman, a badge, a lie, a forced exit, $1 million consequence. A nation nudged toward accountability for the first time in that patrol officer's career.